When does law enforcement cross the line? Not from protection, but into irreversible force. In Minneapolis, a woman is dead. 3 shots were fired, and more than a day later, the most important questions remain unanswered. Officials spoke with certainty. They said this was justified. They said this was necessary, but the videos tell a different story. They show hesitation. They show ambiguity. They show moments that do not neatly fit the official narrative. A vehicle moved. An officer stood in front of it. Commands were shouted. Seconds passed, and a life ended. I've spent years studying moments like this across the world, from protests to war zones, from state power to individual fear. And one truth keeps repeating. These moments are never just about one decision. They are about systems under pressure, rules meeting panic, authority meeting accountability. If you care about how power is used in your name, stay with me. Because to understand this moment, we must first step back. This case is not only about a shooting, it is about what we still do not know. Less than 24 hours after the gunfire, federal officials delivered a clear story. They said an officer was threatened. They said a vehicle was used as a weapon. They said lethal force was justified. But clarity depends on evidence. And here, the evidence is incomplete. We do not see how the encounter began. We do not know whether there was prior contact. We do not know why the woman was stopped, or what authority the agents believed they had in that moment. Video fills some gaps, but it also creates new ones. Different angles suggest different interpretations. Contact may have occurred, or it may not have. At the same time, Minnesota officials say they have been blocked from investigating. The federal government has taken control. And with that, public trust begins to erode. This is why unanswered questions matter. Not emotionally, structurally, because without transparency, power explains itself. And that explanation becomes the truth. To understand why this matters so deeply, we have to look backward. This did not begin on that street, and it did not begin that day. To understand what happened, we have to widen the frame far beyond Minneapolis, far beyond one officer. Over the past few years, immigration enforcement has changed. Not slowly, abruptly. ICE has expanded its operations. Its mandate has hardened. Its political backing has grown louder and more aggressive. Officers are under pressure to act quickly, to assert authority, to avoid hesitation. At the same time, public resistance has increased. Communities are more distrustful. Encounters are more volatile. Every interaction carries political weight. This creates a dangerous cycle. More force leads to more fear. More fear leads to faster decisions. And faster decisions reduce margin for error. Training exists for this reason. Protocols exist to slow chaos, to keep distance, to reduce lethal outcomes. But when policy, politics, and fear converge, those safeguards weaken. What happened in Minneapolis sits inside this larger pattern. A system under strain. A moment where restraint was tested, and in that pressure, something broke. That break becomes visible in the first crisis. The first crisis unfolds in seconds, but it is built over minutes. The officer approaches the vehicle, not from the side, but from the front. Training exists to prevent this, to avoid placing the body in the path of a moving car, to reduce risk for everyone involved. Yet the footage shows the opposite. An officer in front, a partner at the driver's door, a vehicle beginning to move. Commands are shouted out of the car. Again and again, the vehicle rolls forward, the wheel turns away, not toward the officers, at least from one angle. Then the critical moment, possible contact, or no contact at all. The videos disagree, and that disagreement changes everything, because deadly force depends on perception. Not what happens seconds later, but what the officer believed in that instant. 3 shots are fired. The car accelerates. It crashes nearby. In those seconds, the crisis is complete. But the meaning of it is not, because now the question is unavoidable. Was this a necessary response or the result of a preventable position? To answer that, we must look deeper. What looks chaotic on the surface often hides a pattern underneath. This is where the deeper mechanism matters. Law enforcement does not operate on instinct alone. It operates on rules, on training, on policy designed to slow down danger. One of those rules is clear. Do not stand in front of a moving vehicle. Another is just as clear. Do not fire at a moving car unless there is no other option. These rules exist for a reason, because vehicles create uncertainty. They remove control. They turn fear into momentum. And yet, in this case, those safeguards appear to collapse. An officer positions himself in harm's way. A second officer clings to the side. A vehicle becomes the focal point of threat. At that moment, perception overrides protocol. Fear compresses time. Every movement feels amplified. Every second feels final. This is how systems fail. Not through malice, but through pressure. When an officer believes retreat is impossible, force becomes the shortcut, and shortcuts are where tragedies hide. That mechanism leads directly to the next crisis. The second crisis does not happen at the scene. It happens afterward. Once the shots are fired, control shifts. Not to investigators, but to institutions. Federal leaders move fast. They speak with confidence. They define the narrative before questions can form. They say the officer acted properly. They say the threat was real. They say the case is clear. But investigations are supposed to test certainty, not repeat it. Here, that process tightens instead of widens. The FBI takes control. State investigators step back. Minnesota authorities say they are sidelined. This is a different kind of escalation, not physical, procedural, because when one level of government excludes another, accountability narrows. The public is left with fragments, short statements, carefully chosen words, no full timeline. And the more the process closes, the more suspicion grows. This is the second crisis, not whether force was used, but whether the truth will be fully examined. In democracies, legitimacy depends on openness. When power investigates itself, trust erodes quickly. And once trust breaks, the damage spreads far beyond one case. That brings us to the people caught in the middle. This is where the story stops being abstract and becomes personal. Because for the people watching this unfold, you are not thinking about policy. You are thinking about safety. You see a woman in a car. You see officers with guns. And you ask a simple question: could this happen to me? If you live in that neighborhood, this is not a national debate. It is a local fear. You wonder what compliance really means. You wonder how fast is too fast. You wonder how many seconds separate survival from tragedy. For immigrant communities, the fear cuts deeper. Encounters already carry risk, already carry imbalance, already carry silence. When lethal force enters that space, trust collapses. You stop believing explanations. You stop believing reassurances. You stop believing that rules will protect you. This is the human cost. Not just one life lost, but thousands of people recalculating how to behave around power. If institutions want cooperation, they must offer clarity. Without it, fear becomes the dominant language, and fear does not stay contained. It travels outward. What happens next does not stop at city limits. It rarely does. Because immigration enforcement is not local. It is national. And it is watched closely around the world. Every incident becomes a signal to other agencies, to other officers, to other governments. If lethal force is accepted quickly, it lowers the threshold elsewhere. If scrutiny is delayed, it sets a precedent. Allies notice, critics notice, so do authoritarian states that claim force is the only way to maintain order. They point and say, even democracies do this. At home, the ripple spreads through institutions. Police departments reassess risk. Officers become more defensive. Communities become more guarded. That tension feeds itself. Less trust leads to more force. More force leads to less trust. Politically, the divide deepens. Federal authority versus state oversight. Security versus civil restraint. Speed versus accountability. Each side hardens. Each narrative simplifies, and complexity is lost. This is how a single encounter reshapes norms. Quietly, incrementally, not through one dramatic shift, but through repetition. And once norms change, the future follows. So the real question becomes this: where does this path lead? The future now branches into three possible paths, each one shaped by choices made next. The first path is restraint, a full investigation, shared authority, clear answers. In this scenario, transparency slows outrage. Mistakes, if found, are acknowledged. Policy is reinforced. Training is corrected. Trust begins to rebuild. The second path is ambiguity. Partial reviews, limited disclosure, carefully managed conclusions. Here, nothing is fully resolved. Officials defend their own, critics remain unconvinced. The case fades, but the tension stays. This is the most common outcome, and often the most damaging. The third path is escalation. The shooting is fully justified, oversight is dismissed, force becomes normalized. In this future, officers feel validated, communities feel abandoned, and the next encounter becomes more dangerous than the last. These are not predictions. They are patterns. Systems repeat what they reward. They avoid what they confront. The direction chosen here will not only define this case, it will define how power is exercised tomorrow. And that leaves us with one final responsibility. This is not about choosing sides. It is about choosing standards. A woman is dead. An officer pulled the trigger. And a system is being tested in real time. Democracies do not survive on authority alone. They survive on restraint, on doubt, on the willingness to be examined. When power closes ranks too quickly, it signals fear of scrutiny. When investigations narrow, trust collapses. If the use of lethal force was justified, it should withstand full daylight. If it was not, the system must be strong enough to admit it. This is how legitimacy is preserved, not through certainty, but through transparency. What happened in Minneapolis will not be decided only in reports. It will be decided in what comes next, in whether questions are welcomed or silenced. If you believe accountability matters, stay engaged. Ask questions. Demand clarity. Because the moment we stop asking, power stops answering, and the next story begins the same way.